Welcome back, hope you're doing very well. Today we're going to talk about slide guitar and its role in lots of different kinds of genres. So a lot of people like to throw slide guitar under the bus a little bit, maybe say it's kind of a kitsch throwback, it's great for blues or country or certain types of classic rock, but it's not kind of a relevant tool that you might use on, say, a pop track or more modern kind of music. So to that I say, check out Torn by Natalie Imbruglia, which isn't exactly a modern song anymore, but it's not that old. It's got this slide guitar outro that goes like this. It's got this really kind of wistful, laid-back feel that you probably wouldn't be able to get from another instrument. The slide guitar just fits it really well. The layman probably wouldn't even know they're listening to a slide guitar, but you wouldn't be able to fill that hole with anything else really. So the 5 tips I'm about to give you, I've learned from studying my favourite slide players. So my absolute favourite slide player is a guy called Lowell George from the band Little Feat. But some other great slide players, Derek Trucks, Ry Cooder, Blake Mills, a guy called Joey Landreth, George Harrison, amazing slide player in the Beatles and after the Beatles as well. So let's get into the tips. Tip number 1, tune your guitar up. What do I mean by that? To play slide guitar, most of the time people use open tuning.
What means open tuning?
Basically, open tuning is the other way around. I like them this way. Open tuning is so that it's a chord. Yeah, and various ways to tune the open chord. I use a G tuning.
A lot of the time people use open G tuning, which goes low D, G, D, G, B, D. Now to achieve that tuning, you've got to tune your 6th string, 5th string and 1st string all a tone down. What that means is that you're actually losing tension. The strings get more slack, and when you go to play a note, you hear a lot more kind of buzzing around and string noise. If you can tune your strings up, you increase the amount of tension on the strings, and it gives you kind of a brighter, cleaner sound. So Lowell George, my favourite slide guitarist, played his guitar in open A tuning. Now I know in the video you just saw, he said he played his guitar in open G. However, he contradicts himself in this interview. I use an open A tuning, which is an open G tuning moved up a whole step. Instead of moving the 1st, 5th and 6th string down, I leave them alone and move all the other strings up a whole step. There's a lot more tension on the strings and it gets a much cleaner and brighter sound. So believe what you will, he's obviously contradicting himself. I choose to believe that he played in open A. The fact remains that if you tune your strings up instead of down, you can eliminate a lot of string noise and kind of rattle, and you have to worry less about your left-hand technique with the slide. To record all the slide for this video, I've actually tuned my guitar up to open A and then another minor 3rd, so open C tuning. And that just gives me an extra margin of safety when I'm playing. I really don't have to worry about the left hand all that much, just because the tension on the strings is so high. Tip number 2 is use compression. So compression is a really useful tool when thinking about your slide tone, and it's really, really easy to implement. You know, it's only going to take 5 minutes to learn about it. You can get compressor pedals like this one, the slide rig, although any compressor pedal will do. Or you can use software compression when you're recording, which is what we're going to take a look at now. So for those of you who might not know how compression works or what it's going to do to your guitar, essentially you're just taking the dynamics of the sound and you're squashing them, you're compressing them. So you're taking the loud bits and you're making them slightly quieter, you're taking the quiet bits and making them slightly louder. This can be great for slide guitar especially, because it can give your sound just a little bit more body and give you a bit more sustain as well, so it can kind of elongate the note if you're just playing one long note and you want it to ring for ages. What I've done here is I've recorded one note uncompressed, completely untreated, and then I've copied it to another track and put a compressor on it and bounced it down. So what you're seeing here is the same recording, but this version has been compressed, and you can see that in the waveform, it's slightly different. So let's take a listen to the uncompressed note. And now the compressed note. So as you can hear, it's not a massive difference, but even visually, you can just see that this one has a slightly longer tail, the compressed waveform, and it's got slightly more consistency throughout. So it's got a bit more body and it's got more sustain, as you can see. This one has less sustain, it's got a shorter tail here, and it's got more dynamics. So that's kind of less consistency. Also with the compressed waveform, you can see there's a slightly harsher transient, and that's just a result of the compressor kicking in just after the transient. So let's have a look at the compressor settings here for slide guitar. This is an 1176 plugin. Here I've got a very, very slow release. So on an 1176, everything's the opposite way around. So this is actually a slow release, and this is quite a fast attack, and the ratio is on 4, so not crazy high. If you wanted it to be even more compressed, you'd put it up to 8 or 12. The slow release on your compressor is going to let it work for longer and just give you a bit more sustain, a little bit more consistency in your volume. So on your pedal as well, you can probably tweak the settings so that you've got a fast-ish attack and a very slow release. Let's look at the differences between an uncompressed and a compressed chord as well. So I've got another waveform here. Here's an uncompressed chord. Versus a compressed version at roughly the same volume. So the difference there isn't night and day. We've just got the compressor working a little bit harder on this bottom waveform. You can see the tail is a little bit longer on this bottom one. If you wanted it to work even harder, you could up the ratio from 4 to something like 8 or 12. Tip number 3 is all about what you're doing with your right hand when you're plucking the strings. It's arguably the most important point, because how you pluck the strings is probably the most significant factor in how your guitar is going to sound. A lot of people use a pick when they're playing slide. In my opinion, to get that quintessential slide tone, you need to use fingers, and here's why. Muting is essential for good slide tone, in my opinion. You need to mute all the strings that you don't want to pluck, and then pluck the string with your first finger or with your thumb. With your thumb, you're going to get a slightly fatter tone, as opposed to your finger. There might be a bit more nail involved, it's a bit brighter. But you can see that I'm actually muting all of the other strings with the rest of my hand. And that's just so that you don't get any kind of extraneous noise from the slide. You can hear when I mute that, it kind of goes away. Muting is pretty essential if you just want to play a single note line, so a melody that just happens on one string, like the torn melody that I played at the beginning of the video. It can be a bit of a bummer at first to get the hang of, but like anything, once you practice it over and over and over again, it just becomes second nature. Tip number 4 is a pretty practical tip. It's another gear related one. It's choose the right guitar and think about your pickup selection. Also, when to use a metal slide and when to use a glass slide. So obviously this is a Fender Stratocaster in natural finish. Wow, tastes like wood. This is a great guitar for slide. It's been kind of tried and tested through the ages. A lot of the amazing slide players played guitars like these. However, I can think of loads of slide guitar players who play all kinds of guitars. You know, Derek Trucks plays an SG, Blake Mills plays a Strat, but it's got kind of weird pickups in it. Joey Landreth plays slide on lots of different guitars. When it comes to pickup selection, I feel like on a Fender Strat, the middle pickup is the slide sound, so that's just right bang in the middle there. I've also heard people use the 4th position, the Corey Wong position, and the 2nd position, and those are just going to be slightly less harsh and less nasal than just the middle pickup. So just be aware that that's what you're going to get when you select that middle pickup. It's also good to be aware of the differences between a glass slide and a metal slide. To me, it sounds obvious, but a metal slide is slightly harsher than a glass slide. I've heard people say you should play a metal slide on an electric guitar and a glass slide on an acoustic guitar. I would compare the two, but I don't actually own a glass slide. A metal slide does me for pretty much everything, but I guess it's good to be aware that if you play lots of slide acoustic guitar, maybe you should get a glass slide. Along with tip number 3, tip number 5 is arguably the most important tip. It's know your limitations and be tasteful. So I feel like a lot of the time when people are learning slide guitar, especially if you're on the internet a lot and you're looking at all the guitar heroes, you know, people like Joey Landreth, people who have been studying slide guitar, you know, pretty much exclusively for years and years and years. If you're someone like me who's mainly just a jobbing guitarist that wants to double on slide a bit and just have it as another tool to your tool belt, I don't think the best use of your time is to spend years and years trying to learn the kind of guitar heroics that you hear from people like Derek Trucks and Joey Landreth. Maybe there's more utility in learning the basics and learning how to do them really well so that you can really effectively play something very simple. I think this ties into my last point about utility as well. Mostly when you're playing slide guitar, it's best to think like a singer and to think less is more. So things like vibrato. I always think less is more with vibrato. My favourite singers don't sing with a tremendous amount of vibrato, maybe just a little bit at the end of a line. But unless you're Frankie Valli or you're some doo-wop singer from the 50s,
Nothing I do seems right with you gone.
chances are you're probably not using loads of vibrato when you sing. I think vibrato is best used sparingly, which means when it is used, it's got more of an impact as well because you haven't been overdoing it. So things like tuning, vibrato, your right hand technique, these are all pretty basic things when it comes to playing any instrument really. But if you can nail those, that's going to be 95% of your effectiveness as a slide player, especially if you're a slide player in the studio. You just want to try and get as good a sound as you can possibly get. So that's it. I hope you learned at least one thing that you didn't already know. Well done if you made it this far. Thanks so much for watching. If you've got anything to say, just leave it down in the comments. Please like and subscribe, and stay tuned for more.